Laughter shook the pristine halls of Whitmore Academy. A school built for the privileged, not the poor. You think you can solve this, boy? The white professor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Every student turned, phones out, smirking at the sight of an 11-year-old black boy standing by the board, his small hand trembling, but his eyes steady. He didn't lower it, not even when the professor chuckled. This isn't arithmetic, son. This is real mathematics. More laughter followed. Someone whispered, "He's just a charity case." The boy's voice was quiet but unshaken. "Give me 2 minutes, sir. Just 2. The room went dead silent. Only the chalk ticking against the board echoed in the distance. No one knew that in those 2 minutes, everything would change. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now. Because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. The sun spilled through tall glass windows, lighting up the gleaming floor of Whitmore Academy, a place where money felt louder than talent. Rows of polished desks held sons and daughters of judges, tech millionaires, and politicians. Their laughter came easy. Confidence came inherited. In the third row sat Jalen, the only black scholarship student in the room, his shoes scuffed, his tie slightly frayed, but his notebook filled with equations that even seniors couldn't explain. No one sat beside him. They didn't have to say it. Their glances said enough. Professor Chadwick walked in with his usual smirk, calling roll without once looking Jalen's way. "Remember, class," he said, "this room exists for excellence, not experiments." A few students laughed softly, knowing exactly who the experiment was. Jalen kept his eyes on the chalkboard. He had learned early that silence was safer than defending himself. During group work, one girl whispered, "He's smart for, you know." He heard it. He always did. But instead of reacting, he wrote faster. Fluid dynamics, derivatives, proofs, his world inside the pages. Outside, he was just the outsider. Inside, he was already solving problems their professor couldn't. Professor Chadwick stood tall at the board, chalk tapping with rhythm and pride. "Today," he said, "we'll test how many of you actually belong in this class." Lines of symbols and numbers began filling the board, equations that looked more like art than logic. The room buzzed. Even the best students exchanged nervous glances. "This," he continued, "was part of my doctoral thesis. Don't worry, even grad students can't solve it." He turned, his smirk widening. "But perhaps our scholarship genius would like to try." Laughter again, sharper this time. Jalen froze for half a breath, then stood. "May I?" he asked, his tone calm, not pleading. Chadwick raised a brow. "Of course, Mr. Jalen. Let's all watch the prodigy at work." He stepped aside, handing the chalk like an offering meant to humiliate. "Take your time," the professor said. "We could all use some entertainment." Phones came out again, cameras recording. Whispers turned to chuckles. Someone muttered, "This'll be good." But Jalen didn't hear them anymore. His eyes scanned the wall of symbols, his mind already moving faster, deeper. He didn't see the laughter. He saw patterns. And in those patterns, he saw the solution. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The chalk trembled slightly in Jalen's hand, but his focus didn't waver. He began writing, smooth, fast, confident. Each line erased the smirks around him, each number a quiet rebellion. The room fell into uneasy silence as he spoke through the math, like a conductor guiding an orchestra. "First," he said, "you isolate the periodic boundary condition here." Professor Chadwick blinked, stunned. No hesitation, no mistake, just precision. Within seconds, Jalen had transformed the tangled monster of an equation into a clean, flowing pattern. Even the brightest students leaned forward, their laughter replaced by awe. 2 minutes. That's all it took. Jalen dropped the chalk. It hit the floor with a faint click that sounded louder than any voice in the room. "Done," he said softly. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Chadwick walked closer, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the board like a man searching for a lie. He couldn't find one. The class that mocked him sat frozen, watching the impossible become undeniable. In that silence, one truth echoed louder than their laughter ever had. The boy they doubted just made history. Professor Chadwick stared at the board, his face pale, eyes darting from one solved line to another. This can't be right," he whispered, though every number screamed that it was. Jalen stood quietly, not smug, not afraid, just calm. "You used my own theorem," the professor muttered, disbelief cracking his voice. "How did you even know this method?" Jalen's reply was steady. "You published it, sir. Journal of Advanced Mathematics, 2018, page 72. The room gasped. Students who once laughed now exchanged stunned looks. Chadwick stepped back. "You read my paper?" "The library is digital access," Jalen said simply. "I just wanted to understand why your boundary condition failed." Failed. That word hit harder than any insult. The professor's pride shattered in front of 20 students. "Phone still recording," one girl whispered. "He wasn't guessing, he knew," another murmured. "He's smarter than all of us." But Jalen's next words silenced them again. "My father taught me this pattern," he said quietly, "before he passed away." Chadwick blinked. "Your father?" "Dr. Malik Harris." Jalen said. The name alone changed the air. The same man Chadwick had cited in his thesis. The same black mathematician whose brilliance he once praised, and whose son now stood before him, proving it lived on. By morning, Whitmore Academy buzzed like a hive that had been shaken. Everyone had seen the video. The boy, the equation, the stunned professor. The story had spread beyond the school walls, and the administration was panicking. In a mahogany-paneled conference room, Jalen sat across from 3 board members and Professor Chadwick. The head of the board, Mr. Harrison, forced a smile. "Jalen, we want to commend you. Your performance was remarkable. Truly, but we prefer this little incident stay in-house." Jalen frowned. "Incident?" The woman beside him, Dr. Thorne, leaned forward. "You'll receive a full scholarship private tutoring, even early university access, in exchange for your discretion." "Discretion?" Jalen repeated. "You mean silence?" His grandmother, Miss Keisha Harris, sitting quietly beside him, finally spoke. "My grandson doesn't need your hush money. He needs your respect." Dr. Thorne's smile faded. "Mrs., it's Ms., and I clean this school 3 nights a week," Keisha cut in. "I know what you people whisper when you think no one's listening." The room froze. Jalen met Chadwick's eyes. The professor looked ashamed but said nothing. "You want the truth hidden," Keisha continued, "because it makes you uncomfortable. But comfort never changed anything." She stood, took her grandson's hand. "We're not here for favors. We're here for fairness." The following week, Whitmore Academy gathered in the main hall. Professors, students, and board members all seated in uneasy silence. At the front stood Jalen and his grandmother, facing the same people who once looked down on them. Professor Chadwick stepped to the microphone, voice trembling. "I fail to see the brilliance in front of me because of the blindness inside me," he said. "From this day forward, Whitmore Academy will change." Applause rippled through the crowd, hesitant at first, then stronger. Dr. Thorne followed, reading from a new policy draft. "Effective immediately, Whitmore Academy will implement blind grading, expand scholarship for underrepresented students, and establish the Dr. Malik Harris Scholarship for Mathematical Excellence." Keisha squeezed her grandson's hand. Her eyes glistened with pride. "This is just the beginning, baby," she whispered. "You opened a door that can't be closed again." Jalen looked out at the crowd. The same faces that once laughed now staring with respect. He smiled softly. "My dad used to say math reveals truth," he said. "I guess it just revealed a few more today." The audience stood clapping, and for the first time, the sound wasn't mockery, it was honor. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it